She was only 5 years old, her tiny body trembling in the cold night, when her 9-year-old brother lifted her into his arms. Her head was bleeding, her breath shallow, but he carried her through the storm, step after step, until the bright red letters of the emergency room finally came into view. At his side ran Rex, their loyal German shepherd, barking for help when his young master nearly collapsed at the hospital doors. Doctors rushed forward, but when they asked how she had been hurt, the boy's trembling answer froze the entire room and made them call 911. What would you have done if this had happened in your city? The rain had been falling all day, a steady curtain that blurred the yellowed streetlights along Maple Street. The old apartment complex at the corner, with its cracked brick walls and rusty fire escapes, stood like a weary sentinel. Inside, apartment 3B carried a silence so heavy it felt almost alive. At the small wooden table in the cramped kitchen sat Jackson Hayes, only 9 years old, though his posture and expression belonged to someone far older. Jackson was tall for his age, with a wiry frame that hinted at growth without proper nourishment. His hair was chestnut brown, messy but soft, falling into his wide hazel eyes that often reflected both caution and determination. Life had not been gentle with him. Since his father had disappeared years ago, Jackson had been forced to grow up quickly. His shoulders carried responsibilities no child should bear: cooking, cleaning, and above all, protecting his little sister. At that moment, Jackson was carefully arranging 2 plates of macaroni and cheese, the boxed kind that came cheap at the store. The edges of the pasta were already cooling, but he placed the plates neatly on the table, determined to make dinner feel normal, even when nothing about their life was. Across from him, swinging her little legs under the chair, sat Violet Hayes, 5 years old, with a round face still holding the softness of early childhood. She had curly golden hair that tumbled past her shoulders like sunlight caught in motion, though tonight it was a bit tangled from playing. Violet's blue eyes were bright, curious, and innocent, but also shadowed by an unease no child should know. She clutched a crayon in her small hand, sketching on a wrinkled sheet of paper, a crooked house with a sun above it and 2 stick figures holding hands. In her world of crayons, she could still imagine safety. On the worn rug nearby lay Rex, their 6-year-old German shepherd. He was a powerful animal, built with strong muscles and a broad chest, his black and tan coat gleaming even in the dim light. His ears stood alert, sharp as radar dishes, and his amber eyes followed every sound, every movement. Once trained as a guard dog for a neighbor who had moved away, Rex had found his way into the Hayes family almost by accident, but now he was theirs, and he knew it. To Violet, Rex was a loyal playmate, warm and gentle. To Jackson, Rex was something more, a shield, a silent partner in the nightly mission of survival. The silence of the apartment was broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of a clock on the wall. It was the kind of silence that stretched thin over fear. One wrong sound, one wrong move, and the quiet would shatter. That wrong sound came in the form of a heavy door slam. From the hallway entered Michael Turner, the man who lived with their mother, Rachel. Michael was in his late 30s, with a tall, broad-shouldered build that might have once been athletic, but was now softened by beer and cigarettes. His dark hair was beginning to thin at the crown, and an unkempt beard covered his square jaw. His eyes, small, bloodshot, and restless, carried the kind of sharpness that made children instinctively shrink back. Once, perhaps, Michael had been charming. Rachel, their mother, often said he could light up a room with his stories. But years of disappointment, failed jobs, and the constant escape into alcohol had turned him into a man quick to anger, suspicious of everyone, and perpetually dissatisfied. Michael carried the sour smell of whiskey with him as he stomped into the room. He glanced at the table, at the 2 children, and then at Rex, whose ears twitched as he let out a low, warning rumble. "Quiet that mutt," Michael snapped, tossing his damp jacket over the back of a chair. His voice was gravelly, edged with irritation, as if every word carried the weight of some unspoken resentment. Jackson straightened his back and spoke softly, careful to sound polite. "He's just lying down. He won't bother you." Michael narrowed his eyes at the boy, but said nothing more. He lumbered toward the refrigerator, pulled out a can of beer, and cracked it open. The hiss of carbonation filled the room like a signal of unease. He leaned against the counter, watching the children eat. Rachel, their mother, was not there. She was working her second shift at the diner downtown. Rachel Hayes, 35, was a tall woman with long auburn hair often tied back hastily, her fair skin lined prematurely by worry. Life as a single mother had worn her thin. She had once been lively, laughing easily, but years of juggling bills, enduring heartbreak, and trying to keep her children safe had drained much of that light. Her decision to let Michael move in had been born not of love, but of desperation. He had promised stability, promised to help. Instead, he had brought more shadows into their lives. As the minutes dragged on, the air thickened. Violet stopped coloring and glanced nervously at Michael, then leaned down to stroke Rex's back. The dog pressed against her legs, his warmth steady, his body tense. Jackson forced himself to eat a few bites, though his stomach twisted. He had learned the rhythm of nights like this. Keep quiet, keep still, and hope Michael would stay in his chair until he passed out. But Michael's restless energy tonight told Jackson it would not be so simple. Michael finally spoke, his words slurred but sharp. "Where's your mother?" "At work," Jackson replied quickly. "She said she'll be back late." Michael grunted, drained half his beer, and set the can down with a loud clank. He stared at the boy for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as though measuring something invisible. Jackson felt the weight of that stare like a stone pressing against his chest. Violet, sensing the tension, whispered to Rex, her tiny voice trembling, "It's okay, boy. Just stay with us." The German shepherd's ears flicked back, and he let out another low growl, softer this time, almost like a promise. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, echoing down Maple Street. The storm was building, both beyond the walls and within them. And so, the apartment fell silent again. The kind of silence that is not peace but the stillness before something breaks. Jackson sat at the table, his small hands curled into fists under the wood. Violet clutched her crayon so tightly that the paper tore. Rex lay between them and Michael, a sentinel with fur bristling, amber eyes unblinking. It was in this heavy silence, thick with fear and unspoken hope, that the night began to write its terrible story. The night dragged on with the smell of stale beer thick in the apartment. Rain hammered against the cracked windows, and every drop seemed to echo Michael Turner's restlessness. He sat slouched in the armchair, his broad frame nearly spilling over the sides, a fresh can of beer sweating in his grip. His thick knuckles, scarred from fights long past, tapped impatiently against the aluminum, a staccato rhythm that set Jackson's teeth on edge. Michael's face was flushed from drink, his unkempt beard glistening with condensation from the can. His dark eyes, small and cruel, shifted constantly between the flickering television and the children sitting quietly at the table. There was a time, so Rachel once said, when Michael had been different charming even. A promising baseball player in high school, he'd carried himself with confidence and laughter. But an injury to his shoulder ended that dream, and bitterness took root in his heart. Now he drowned his disappointments in alcohol, quick to lash out at the nearest target when the weight of his failures pressed too hard. Jackson sat stiffly, trying to make himself invisible, though his hazel eyes darted to his sister. Violet was humming to herself, her golden curls bouncing as she reached for her cup of water. Her small hand trembled slightly, whether from the cold or from fear, Jackson couldn't tell. At her feet, Rex shifted, the German shepherd's pointed ears twitching at every creak of the floorboards. It happened quickly. So quickly Jackson barely had time to register it. Violet's hand slipped, the plastic cup tipped, and water cascaded across the table, soaking into the paper where her crayon drawing of a sun and house had been. Michael's head snapped up, his jaw tightened, the cords in his neck standing out like ropes. "God damn it!" he roared, slamming the beer can onto the armrest. Foam fizzed over his thick fingers. Violet froze, her blue eyes wide with terror. She stammered, I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" Before she could finish, Michael was on his feet, his heavy boots thudding across the floor. His broad shoulders loomed, his face twisted with fury. The veins in his temples bulged as he pointed a shaking finger at the little girl. "You stupid brat!" Jackson's body reacted before his mind could. He pushed back his chair so hard it scraped the linoleum, stepping between Michael and his sister. His skinny frame trembled, but he raised his chin defiantly. "Leave her alone!" For a heartbeat, the apartment went still, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of the storm outside. Michael's lip curled into something between a sneer and a snarl. "You don't tell me what to do in my house," he spat, though it was Rachel's paycheck that kept the roof overhead. Then the blow came. Michael's arm swung out. A violent backhand meant to shove Jackson aside. But Jackson ducked at the last second, and the full force of the man's arm slammed into Violet. She flew sideways, her tiny body colliding with the corner of the table. A sickening crack followed, then a sharp cry of pain. Blood trickled immediately from her temple, staining her golden curls crimson. She collapsed to the floor, dazed, her little hands trembling as she reached instinctively toward her brother. Jackson's world tilted. His ears rang with Violet's whimper, with the pounding of his own heart. His chest burned with helpless rage. But Rex reacted faster. The German shepherd launched to his feet, muscles rippling, fur bristling along his spine. His deep growl reverberated through the room, low and threatening, before erupting into explosive barks. He planted himself between the children and Michael, lips peeled back to reveal gleaming white teeth. His amber eyes blazed with primal fury, locked onto the man who had struck the little girl he had sworn to guard. Michael staggered back half a step, startled, then his anger flared hotter. "You mangy beast!" he shouted, swinging his boot viciously toward Rex. The kick landed against the dog's ribs with a dull thud, but Rex did not retreat. He snarled, louder, snapping his jaws inches from Michael's leg, forcing the man to jerk back. The sound filled the apartment, fierce and unrelenting, as if Rex had transformed into a living wall of muscle and rage. Jackson dropped to his knees beside Violet, lifting her gently. His hands shook as he pressed the hem of his shirt against her bleeding temple. "It's okay, Vi. I've got you," he whispered, though his voice cracked with fear. Her eyes fluttered, wet with tears, but she clung to him weakly. He looked at Rex, still holding Michael at bay, and then at the door. He knew in that moment they couldn't stay here, not another second. If they did, Violet might not survive the next outburst. Jackson's young face hardened, his hazel eyes burning with a resolve far beyond his years. "We're leaving," he murmured, though his voice was barely audible under the storm. As if he understood, Rex backed toward the children, his body still angled protectively against Michael, his growl unwavering. Michael, chest heaving, glared at them, his rage tangled with the haze of alcohol. But for once, he did not advance. Perhaps it was Rex's teeth, bared and ready. Perhaps it was the look in Jackson's eyes, a boy no longer begging, but deciding. Jackson gathered Violet into his arms, the weight of her small body heavier than anything he had ever carried. Her warm blood dampened his sleeve. He rose unsteadily to his feet, heart thundering in his chest. Rex pressed close at his side, nudging the door with his nose as if to say, "Go, now." And Jackson knew. The time had come. The front door groaned as Jackson pushed it open, the hinges shrieking against years of rust. A wall of rain immediately swept into the dim hallway, soaking his sneakers and making the floorboards slick. The night beyond was a churning sea of shadows and water, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. Jackson adjusted Violet on his back. She was frighteningly light, her arms limp around his shoulders. He had pressed an old dish towel against her bleeding temple and tied it as tightly as he dared. She whimpered once but didn't protest. Exhaustion was pulling her down. He tugged the oversized raincoat tighter around her small body, letting the cold water drench his own thin shirt. His chestnut hair clung to his forehead, and his hazel eyes wide but resolute scanned the road ahead. Rex burst through the doorway with a shake, droplets flying from his black and tan coat. His ears stood tall, nostrils flaring as he took in the storm. The German shepherd was no stranger to chaos. His powerful frame seemed carved for moments like this. Muscles rippled under his thick fur, and his tail whipped with restless energy. He glanced back at Jackson, then turned toward the street, barking once as if to say, "Follow me!" The three of them plunged into the night. The neighborhood of Maple Street, poor and weary, lay under siege from the storm. Old picket fences bowed under the weight of water. Trash bins floated like tiny boats down the flooded gutters. From the windows of other apartments, pale faces occasionally appeared, neighbors who peeked at the commotion but quickly drew their curtains shut. Jackson's sneakers splashed through ankle-deep water as he staggered forward. Every step felt heavier than the last. his sister's weight pressing down on his narrow shoulders. But he gritted his teeth and pressed on. Rex stayed at his side, sometimes trotting ahead, sometimes circling back. His eyes gleamed with intelligence, his sharp bark slicing through the storm to warn off passing cars. At one intersection, headlights cut through the rain, a pickup truck barreling too fast down the flooded street. Rex lunged forward, barking furiously, his body angled toward the oncoming lights. The driver, startled, swerved at the last moment, tires screeching. The truck sprayed a wave of muddy water, but it missed the children. Jackson looked down at Rex, breathless. "Good boy! Good boy!" he gasped, and the shepherd gave a single sharp bark in reply before moving ahead again. Halfway down the block, a door opened, spilling warm light onto the street. An elderly woman stepped out, umbrella trembling in her spotted hands. Mrs. Evelyn Moore, nearly 70, was short and slightly stooped, her gray hair tied in a bun. Her pale face showed the wrinkles of a life of hard work, but her soft brown eyes held kindness. She had been their neighbor for years, always slipping Violet a cookie when Michael wasn't looking. She gasped when she saw the boy. "Jackson! Child, what are you doing out in this weather? And your sister, oh Lord, is she hurt?" Jackson didn't slow. His voice cracked but was firm. "I have to get her to the hospital, Mrs. Moore. Please, just stay inside. It's not safe." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. She clutched her shawl tight, lips trembling, but she didn't stop him. She simply whispered, "God watch over you," before retreating inside. The door closed, the light vanished, and once again only the storm remained. The road seemed endless. Jackson's legs shook under Violet's weight, though she was just a child. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one burning his lungs. The rain blurred his vision, but he refused to stop. Violet stirred against his shoulder, her tiny voice weak as a thread. "Jack, it hurts. I know, Vi, I know. Just hold on a little longer," he whispered, adjusting her carefully so the towel pressed against her wound. His words were more for himself than for her. Rex barked suddenly, his ears pricked. He darted ahead and stopped at a corner where the street had become a miniature river. The water rushed quickly, nearly knee-deep, carrying branches and debris. Jackson froze, heart hammering. How could he cross? But Rex, agile and sure-footed, waded in first, testing the current. He looked back, barking sharply, encouraging the boy. Jackson swallowed his fear, tightened his grip on Violet, and stepped into the icy flow. The water shoved against his thin legs, but Rex walked just ahead, glancing back each step as if guiding him across a dark bridge. Together, drenched and shivering, they reached the other side. Jackson stumbled to his knees, clutching Violet tight, but Rex was there, nudging him up with his strong head. The dog's amber eyes seemed to burn with a command. "Keep moving." By the time they reached the long stretch of Willow Avenue, Jackson could barely feel his legs. Violet was frighteningly quiet now, her head resting against his shoulder, her breath shallow. Street lamps buzzed and flickered. A single sedan passed slowly, its windshield wipers slapping furiously. The driver, a middle-aged man with thinning blonde hair and a tired face, glanced their way. His name was Tom Callahan, a factory worker known for keeping to himself, often seen in grease-stained coveralls. For a brief moment, Tom slowed, his brow furrowed. But then he accelerated, perhaps telling himself it wasn't his business. Jackson didn't see the man's hesitation. His world had shrunk to Violet's fragile breathing and the sound of Rex's paws splashing beside him. Finally, in the distance, a glow cut through the rain, the red neon letters of St. Mary's Hospital. They shimmered like a beacon through the storm. Relief surged through Jackson's aching chest, but it was fleeting, His legs trembled violently, every muscle screaming for rest. Rex barked, louder this time, as though announcing their arrival to the night itself. The dog's powerful frame pressed against Jackson's side, helping steady him for the final stretch. With Violet on his back, her golden curls matted with blood and rain, Jackson staggered toward the hospital entrance. Behind them, Maple Street disappeared into the storm. Ahead of them lay a hope fragile and uncertain. But it was all they had. And so, 3 small figures, a boy, a girl, and a dog, marched through the storm, bound together by desperation, love, and courage. The neon glow of St. Mary's Hospital loomed ahead, its letters blurred by sheets of rain. The building rose like a fortress in the night, its wide glass doors glowing warm and sterile. For Jackson, it felt both impossibly close and unbearably far. Every step toward the entrance was a battle, his sneakers squelched with water, his thin arms trembling from holding Violet's small body on his back. His hazel eyes were bleary with exhaustion, but he kept them locked on the glowing red letters that promised help. Violet barely stirred now, her golden curls plastered to her forehead, her breathing shallow. The makeshift bandage around her head was soaked through. Jackson tried to whisper encouragement, but his throat was raw from cold air and fear. Almost there, Vi, just a little more. Beside them, Rex darted ahead, then back, then ahead again. His powerful frame cut through the storm, his fur dripping wet, but his energy undimmed. The German shepherd's amber eyes burned with focus. He knew the urgency. His barks grew louder as they neared the doors, sharp cries that pierced the night. It was those barks that saved them. Inside the emergency room, a few staff were catching a rare moment of quiet. It was the night shift, a time when exhaustion etched itself into every line of their faces. Nurse Karen Whitfield was the first to hear it. Karen was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with short-cropped dark hair streaked faintly with gray. Her pale skin bore the faint lines of someone who had lived through both laughter and hardship. Known for her calm authority, she had built a reputation as the nurse who could steady even the most chaotic situations. Tonight, she had been filling out reports when the frantic barking reached her ears. She frowned, adjusted her rectangular glasses, and glanced toward the glass doors. Through the sheets of rain, she caught sight of a boy staggering forward, carrying a smaller figure on his back. A large dog darted at his side, barking with desperate urgency. "Good Lord!" she breathed, and then shouted toward the triage desk. "Someone open the doors!" The sliding doors parted, and the storm rushed in. Jackson stumbled forward, blinking against the sudden glare of hospital lights. His thin frame shook violently, every muscle screaming for relief. His lips were pale, his breath ragged. Rex shot through the doorway first, barking furiously, his paws skidding on the polished tile. The shepherd spun back toward the entrance, growling low in his throat until the boy appeared. Karen rushed forward just as Jackson's knees buckled. She caught him under one arm, her strength surprising for her lean frame. "I've got you, sweetheart," she murmured, though her eyes widened at the blood matting Violet's hair. Another figure appeared at her side. Dr. Miguel Rivera is a man in his late 30s with warm brown skin and a sturdy build. His black hair was cropped short, flecked with early streaks of gray at the temples. A neatly trimmed beard framed his square jaw, and his dark eyes radiated both intelligence and compassion. Known for working double shifts without complaint, Rivera had earned the respect of the entire ER. He was steady under pressure, though those close to him knew the long hours weighed on him. His wife had left years ago, tired of the constant absences. "Head trauma," Rivera assessed quickly, already moving into action. He gestured sharply. "Get a stretcher now." As the staff hurried, Jackson collapsed fully. His small body slid from Karen's grasp, crumpling onto the tile floor. His arms still clutched Violet weakly, even unconscious. "Easy, son. We'll take it from here," Rivera said softly, kneeling to pry Violet gently from his brother's arms. He laid her carefully onto the waiting stretcher as nurses swarmed. Rex lunged forward, barking ferociously. His body lowered into a protective stance, hackles raised, his teeth bared. The shepherd planted himself between Violet and the strangers, his growl reverberating through the ER like a warning siren. Several staff froze, unsure whether to approach. One young orderly, James Patel, a thin man in his 20s with nervous eyes and neatly combed black hair, hesitated with the stretcher handles. "Doctor, what if the dog bites?" he stammered. Rivera raised a hand, calm but firm. His voice carried the steadiness of someone used to cutting through fear. "Don't push him. He's protecting them. Let him see." Karen crouched slightly, her voice gentler than the storm outside. "It's okay, boy. We're here to help. Look at her." She pointed softly as another nurse dabbed at Violet's wound. Rex's growl wavered. His amber eyes darted between Violet's pale face and the hands tending her. He whined once, then circled the stretcher, never more than a foot away, until at last he allowed them to wheel her deeper into the ER. Even then, the dog never stopped watching. His tail was stiff, his body tense, but his loyalty anchored him firmly by their side. Karen bent to lift Jackson from the floor. His damp shirt clung to his thin frame, his lips faintly blue from cold and exhaustion. She brushed wet hair from his forehead, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "Poor thing," she murmured. Rivera glanced at him. "Get him on a bed, too. He's in shock and near hypothermia. He carried her here through that storm." The doctor's tone was half clinical, half awed. As they lifted Jackson, his fingers twitched, grasping at the air until they found Rex's fur. Even unconscious, he sought the dog's presence. Rex pressed his massive head against the boy's hand, whining low in his throat. Only then did Jackson's body relax. The storm still raged outside, but within the bright halls of St. Mary's, the night's desperate march had ended, at least for now. The emergency department at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with sudden urgency. The storm outside seemed to echo through its sterile halls, thunder rattling the glass as if the night itself had followed the children indoors. Dr. Miguel Rivera moved with swift precision, his steady hands guiding the nurses. He bent over Violet, now lying pale on a hospital bed. Her golden curls were matted with blood, her small chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Rivera's dark brows knitted tightly as he checked her pupils with a penlight. "Responsive, but sluggish," he muttered, his baritone voice laced with worry. He turned to Nurse Karen Whitfield, still at his side. "We need a CT scan immediately. Possible concussion, maybe worse." Karen nodded, her slender fingers already preparing supplies. She was a woman who had seen countless traumas cross these halls, accidents, overdoses, violence, but children always struck her the hardest. Her sharp eyes softened as she brushed a damp curl from Violet's forehead. "Hang on, sweetheart," she whispered. Nearby, another bed had been pulled up for Jackson. His small body looked almost swallowed by the white sheets. His chestnut hair was plastered to his forehead, his skin pale, his lips tinged blue. His hazel eyes fluttered open and shut, caught between exhaustion and stubborn determination to stay awake. Beside him, as unshakable as a shadow, lay Rex. The German shepherd had stationed himself at Jackson's side, his great body pressed close enough that the boy's hand rested on his thick fur. Rex's ears twitched at every sound, his amber eyes never leaving the faces of the staff. Whenever a stranger leaned too close, he growled low, the sound vibrating through the bed frame until reassured by Rivera or Karen's calm voices. The automatic doors hissed open, and with them came the heavy tread of boots. Officer Daniel Harper entered, shaking rain from his jacket. Harper was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of long years in uniform. His square jaw was rough with a day's stubble, and deep lines framed his gray eyes that had seen more cruelty than he cared to remember. A veteran of the local police force, Harper had a reputation for patience with victims and none for abusers. His father had been a violent man, fists and drink ruling his household. Harper had sworn as a boy never to let such things happen unchecked again. He approached quietly, his heavy boots squeaking on the linoleum. "Doctor," he said with a respectful nod to Rivera, "heard we've got a situation involving 2 minors?" Rivera straightened, pulling off his gloves. "Yes. Girl, about 5, blunt head trauma, likely from an assault. Boy, 9 years old, exhausted and hypothermic but stable. They walked here, carried her through the storm." Harper's gray eyes flicked to Jackson, then to Rex, who immediately lifted his head and let out a warning rumble. Harper crouched slowly, keeping his broad hands visible. "Easy, fella. You're doing a good job. Nobody here's going to hurt them." Rex's growl softened, though his eyes stayed sharp, following Harper's every movement. Jackson stirred, his hazel eyes opening. He blinked at the officer, fear flaring in his gaze. His lips parted as if to speak, then clamped shut. His thin shoulders shook under the blanket. Karen bent over him gently. "It's okay, Jackson. You're safe now. This is Officer Harper. He just wants to help." But Jackson's eyes darted to the door, as though expecting Michael to burst in at any moment. The boy's chest rose and fell too quickly, breath hitching in panic. Harper recognized the look. It was the same one he had worn as a boy when his father's footsteps thundered in the hall. He lowered his voice, steady and calm. "Son, you don't have to say anything you don't want to, but I promise you, No one's going to hurt you or your sister while I'm here." Still, Jackson shook his head. His small hand clenched tighter in Rex's fur, knuckles white. His lips trembled, but no words came. Rex seemed to sense the boy's turmoil. The shepherd shifted closer, pressing his warm body against Jackson's side. He lowered his massive head onto the boy's trembling arm. The weight was grounding, steady. Rex's amber eyes looked up into Jackson's, calm and loyal, as though urging, "You're not alone. Speak." Jackson's hazel eyes filled with tears. His chest hitched, and at last, the dam inside him broke. He clutched Rex desperately, burying his face into the dog's damp fur. "It was him," he sobbed, voice muffled but clear. Michael did it. He hit her." The words echoed through the sterile ER, heavy and undeniable. Karen closed her eyes briefly, her face tightening with grief. Rivera exhaled slowly, steadying himself. Harper's jaw clenched, his gray eyes darkening with grim resolve. Jackson lifted his tear-streaked face just enough to look at the officer. His small voice cracked, but the truth poured out in jagged pieces. How Michael had been drinking, how Violet had only spilled water, how the blow had sent her crashing into the table. His words tumbled, broken by sobs, but each one was a blade carving away the silence that had bound him. When he finished, his small body collapsed against Rex once more, spent but lighter somehow, as though naming the monster had stolen some of its power. Rex licked the boy's cheek gently, a silent benediction. Harper rose slowly, his broad shoulders squared. His voice was calm but laced with iron. "Thank you, Jackson. You did the right thing. We'll make sure he never hurts you again." The storm outside raged on, but within the walls of St. Mary's, a different storm had finally broken. The truth, carried on the trembling voice of a 9-year-old boy, and steadied by the silent strength of a dog who never left his side. The fluorescent lights of the hospital glared against the sterile white walls, a sharp contrast to the storm still raging outside. Within the emergency ward, the atmosphere had shifted from the frantic rush of earlier to a heavy, quiet waiting. Machines beeped steadily at Violet's bedside. Jackson, now washed and wrapped in warm blankets, slept fitfully in a chair nearby. Rex curled like a living sentinel at his feet. It was into this fragile calm that Michael Turner walked. The man looked almost respectable at first glance. He had changed out of his damp clothes into a dark jacket, his thinning black hair slicked back with water, his broad frame carrying the false weight of concern. His unshaven jaw was shadowed with coarse stubble, and his bloodshot eyes glistened as though with worry. But those who knew how to look closer would have seen the twitch at his jaw, the faint sway in his stance from too much drink. Michael carried with him the same storm as outside, cloaked in a performance. He strode to the reception desk with the air of someone entitled, his voice too loud for the quiet hall. "I'm here for my kids," he announced, pressing his thick hands against the counter. "I was told they were brought in." The young receptionist, Clara Jenkins, looked up nervously. She was a college student working the night shift, short and round-faced, her curly auburn hair tied back in a ponytail. Clara was known for her kind manner with patients, but often grew flustered under pressure. She hesitated now, glancing down at her screen. Before she could answer, Officer Daniel Harper appeared from down the hall. His tall figure filled the space, his gray eyes narrowing immediately upon seeing Michael. He had stayed near the children since Jackson's confession, waiting for this very moment. "Turner," Harper said evenly, his deep voice steady as stone. Michael turned, his mouth curling into what might pass as a smile. "Officer, thank God you're here. You see, there's been some misunderstanding. I was worried sick when I heard the kids ran out into the storm." His words were polished, almost rehearsed, but his eyes flickered too much, darting toward the hallway where Violet lay. Harper didn't answer, only gestured for him to follow. "This way." They entered the room where Violet rested. Her small form lay beneath crisp white sheets, an IV dripping steadily at her side. Jackson stirred at the sound of footsteps, blinking awake, his hazel eyes widening in dread the moment he saw Michael's looming figure. His small hand reached instinctively for Rex. The shepherd rose at once, muscles taut, fur bristling. A low growl rumbled from his chest, deep and menacing. His amber eyes locked onto Michael, with a fury no performance could disarm. Michael forced a laugh, spreading his arms as though greeting old friends. "There they are, my kids. "How are they, Doc? Poor little Violet." His voice faltered on her name, not from emotion, but from the effort of pretending he had any. Dr. Miguel Rivera, standing near the monitors, crossed his arms. His calm, dark eyes had measured hundreds of men, and he saw through this one with ease, but he stayed silent, letting the truth surface in its own time. At that moment, Violet stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, her blue eyes clouded with confusion. She turned her head slightly and then froze. Her gaze landed on Michael. Her small body tensed instantly. She let out a sharp, frightened breath and clutched at Rex, who pressed his great head against her chest protectively. Her little fingers dug into his fur as though clinging to life itself. Her lips trembled, and her voice came out as a whisper fractured by fear. "Jack, are we safe now?" The room went silent. Even the machines seemed to pause, their steady beeps marking the weight of her words. Jackson's eyes filled with tears. He reached for her hand across the bed rail. "Yes, Vi," he whispered, though his voice cracked. "We're safe now. We are." Michael's forced expression faltered, his mouth opening to speak, but the truth had already shattered his mask. The fear in Violet's voice, the way she clung to Rex, the way Jackson answered, none of it could be hidden. Officer Harper stepped forward, his voice firm. "That's enough." Michael stiffened. "Now wait a damn minute." But Harper's hand was already at his belt. In a practiced motion, he pulled out the cuffs. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Michael Turner, you're under arrest for child endangerment and assault." Michael's face twisted into rage, the mask fully gone. "You can't," he began, but Harper had already turned him, snapping the cold steel around his thick wrists. Rex erupted in a fierce volley of barks, tail rigid, body surging with victorious energy. He didn't lunge, he didn't need to. His voice alone filled the room with the sound of justice, the sound of chains breaking. Violet pressed her face into his fur, tears streaming, but this time they weren't only from fear. Jackson, pale but resolute, sat taller in his chair, his eyes locked on the man being led away. For the first time, the weight of silence lifted from Maple Street. The snow had melted, leaving behind the sweet scent of thawing earth. Spring unfurled gently over Willow Creek, the small town where the Hayes family had been given a second chance. The apartment on Maple Street was no longer their home. Its walls, once saturated with silence and fear, were behind them now. In its place stood a modest two-bedroom apartment on the brighter side of town, its windows overlooking a row of budding cherry trees. The rent had been covered for the first year by a community relief program, organized by townsfolk who had rallied after hearing the children's story. For Rachel Hayes, this change was nothing short of salvation. Rachel, now 36, still bore the auburn hair that tumbled past her shoulders, though she had cut it shorter to feel lighter, freer. Her fair skin, once marked with exhaustion, had begun to regain its color. There were still fine lines of worry at the corners of her eyes, but they softened when she smiled, a smile that had been rare in the old days. She worked a single job now, at a local bakery where the scent of bread clung to her apron. It didn't pay much, but it was steady and close to home, allowing her to be present for her children. Rachel had always been resilient, but after Michael's arrest, she had feared her strength wasn't enough. The community proved her wrong. Neighbors she barely knew donated furniture, clothes, and toys for the children. Local churches held fundraisers. A retired carpenter repaired a broken bed frame without charging a dime. For the first time, Rachel didn't feel like she was fighting the world alone. Jackson had changed too. No longer the boy trapped in survival mode, he began to reclaim parts of his childhood. At 9 years old, his hazel eyes still held shadows of responsibility, but they also carried new sparks of mischief and curiosity. His chestnut hair was neatly combed most mornings, and he had started playing baseball with other kids at the park. He was also in therapy. Every Wednesday afternoon, he and Violet visited Dr. Sarah Monroe, a child psychologist in her early 40s. Dr. Monroe was tall and slender, with shoulder-length sandy hair streaked with blonde highlights. Her gentle green eyes seemed to read unspoken words, and her voice carried a steady calm. Having grown up in foster care herself, she had chosen her profession out of empathy, determined to help children break cycles of trauma. Jackson didn't always like talking about the past, but Dr. Monroe never pushed too hard. Instead, she guided him with patience, reminding him that being a protector didn't mean he had to carry the world alone. Slowly, Jackson began to trust that safety could last. Violet, at 5, had blossomed despite her scar. The faint line along her temple was a reminder of that terrible night, but her blue eyes had regained their brightness. She laughed more now, her golden curls bouncing as she skipped along sidewalks. In therapy, she learned to express her fears through drawings, pictures of a house with sunlight, a boy, a girl, and always a big dog standing guard. At night, she no longer clung to Jackson out of fear, but curled up with Rex, her head nestled into his thick fur. She whispered her secrets to him, believing he understood every word, and perhaps, in his way, he did. Rex had become more than family. To the Hayes children, he was a guardian angel on 4 legs. To Willow Creek, he was a hero. The town held a small ceremony on the courthouse steps one Saturday morning. The mayor, Linda Whitmore, a stout woman in her 50s with short silver hair and a booming laugh, presented Rex with a medal that gleamed against his black and tan coat. "For bravery beyond measure," she declared, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Children clapped and cheered, and townsfolk whistled as Rex sat proudly, ears high, amber eyes gleaming. Jackson held his collar, while Violet hung the medal around his neck with trembling hands. Rex gave a low bark, as though humbly accepting the honor, though to him, the title of hero mattered less than the safety of his 2 humans. From that day on, people in town often stopped to greet him. Children would run up to pat his head, though he always kept a watchful eye, never straying far from Jackson and Violet. The townsfolk called him the 4-legged guardian of Willow Creek. On a fresh spring morning, sunlight spilled through the new apartment's curtains. Birds chirped in the cherry trees outside, their blossoms swaying gently in the breeze. Jackson, wearing his school backpack, stood ready at the door. He held Violet's small hand in his, her curls tied back with a blue ribbon. She carried a tiny lunchbox decorated with stars, her legs bouncing with the excitement of school. "Stay together," Rachel reminded them, smoothing Violet's hair and pressing a kiss to Jackson's forehead. Her voice was steady now, no longer cracking under exhaustion. Rex trotted forward, nails clicking softly against the floor. His black and tan coat shone in the morning light, his medal glinting faintly as it dangled from his collar. He pressed his nose against Rachel's hand before moving to Jackson's side, tail wagging once, ready for duty. Together, they stepped outside. The air was crisp, the world alive with new beginnings. Jackson walked tall, Violet skipped at his side, and Rex paced beside them like a silent bodyguard. Passing neighbors waved, their smiles genuine. As they crossed the street toward the school, Rex barked once, a clear, ringing sound that echoed in the spring air. It was not a bark of warning, but of promise of protection, of triumph, of a life no longer bound by fear. 3 hearts, once scarred by darkness, now beat in rhythm with hope. And so, they walked into a future brighter than they had ever dared to imagine. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come as thunder from the heavens, but in the quiet strength of a child who refuses to give up, in the loyal heart of a dog who stands guard, and in the hands of strangers who choose kindness over silence. Jackson, Violet, and Rex remind us that God's light shines even in the darkest nights, guiding us towards safety and new beginnings. May this story be a prayer for every child in need of protection, for every family seeking healing, and for every heart searching for hope. If you believe in God's miracles in everyday life, share this story so others may feel His presence. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to hear more stories of courage, love, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe. May God bless you and keep you safe, always.